Hello, I hope you are doing well. I'm pretty sure you have often wondered why doesn't R support trailing commas in the concatenation operator and in the list function? Well, I also don't know, but in this video, we are going to create our own alternative to list and we are going to call it list2. It should behave identically to list, only that it's going to support a trailing comma, right? Okay, let's get to it. So we have just a bare minimum documentation for the function. So of course, it's an alternative to base list, and then you're saying the dots are optional. Why? Because you can call list without any arguments. So our function also needs to behave in the same way. And then we are saying whatever is passed in the dots can either be named or unnamed arguments or a mixture of the two, and those are going to make the list items. And of course, our function should return the same thing as list would, right? And then we have the function signature there, and then of course just a small example. Then in this other file I have a couple of tests for a function to ensure that it's correct. So basically we start off small, with unnamed arguments, then named arguments, and then we test for both named and unnamed. Then we check how our list2 behaves with null. But the most important test is the last one, where we ensure that our list2 correctly forwards and receives the dots, just like list does. Okay, so let's start this implementation. So we are now inside of list2 and we have the dots. For us to check whether that last value is missing, or rather whether there is a trailing comma, we cannot afford to evaluate these dots. We need to make the check before the evaluation of the dots. Here is what I mean. You see what happens when you call list with 1, 2, 3 and a trailing comma is it fails, but it fails because it evaluates those dots, right? So obviously after evaluation, the argument number 4 is empty. In our case, what you need to do is ensure before this evaluation, we've already kicked out the empty argument. And we are specifically focusing on the last argument here. We are not interested in like the middle arguments being empty. We're only interested in the last one because that's where the trailing comma is anyway. So we know that we don't want to evaluate the dots, right? So what do? Let's check the dots, let's check the docs of dot 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 ELT. So in ELT, it says the dots and dot dot one, dot dot two, etc. are used to refer to arguments passed down from a calling function, of course, right? This and the following can only be used inside a function which has dots among its formal arguments. Then we are told a dot 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 ELTN is a functional way to get the value of the nth dot, and basically the same as eval pist0 dot dot then n, just more elegant and efficient. Let's scroll down a bit. Here we see dot 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 length returns the number of expressions in dot dot dot. So when you want to get the number of arguments passed to dot dot dot, you use dot 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 length. And then dot 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 names returns the names. So they are basically the equivalent of doing the length of your list and getting the names of your list. But here's the key thing, but without evaluating the expressions in dot dot dot, which is exactly what we want. So this is the documentation page. Okay, so we already know a couple of things and we are going to need to know the length of our dots. So we are going to say n will be the dot 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 length so that we know how many are there. And we are just going to check if the length of n is 0. So if n is equals to 0, I just want you to return an empty list. So this will take care of the case where this function is called with no arguments. So if the length of n is, if n is 0, not the length of n, if n is 0, I just want you to return an empty list, right? Then we also need the names. So I'm just going to assign those to a variable called nms. So nms will be ... and then names. Okay. Now at this point, we need to check, is that last value missing, like the last value in the dots, is it missing, right? So to do that, let's create a variable called has trailing comma. And how do you check if a value is missing in R? You have two options. You can either use the missing function, or you can check whether that value is identical to an empty expression. So we can just use missing in this case. So we are going to say missing, but then again, the thing with missing is, let me show you. So if we check missing, this x, missing expects it to be a formal argument to the function. So in our case, even if I were to try and, pass in something like paste 0 ... and then n, like when you do ... n. So, okay, maybe I didn't explain well, but going back to the docs of ELT, you can see that the first argument when you're using the dots is referenced by ... 1. The second one is referenced by ... 2, and so on. So this means in our function, when we want to access the last argument, we only need to do paste 0 and then ... and then the index, which is n in this case. But if we do this, missing is not going to work, and we can actually test it. So I'll just throw in a browser there. When you, of course, throw the browser and you execute the program, browser pauses the program at exactly where you have it, and you can inspect the program status. So that's what we are going to do. So in this case, if I try to source list 2, you see we get an error because I have the browser before the after the missing is evaluated, and we are being told that we have an invalid use of missing, right? But what we need is do.call. So when you say do.call, and then I want you to call missing, and the arguments, in this case there's only one argument, and it's going to be the expression. So paste 0 ... and then n. So now this is going to give me the has trailing comma variable. Sorry. So the difference between this first one and this second one is that in the second one, we kind of, it's like calling missing with the already evaluated value, which is what we want. In this case, when we say missing and then paste 0 ... n, so missing doesn't evaluate its arguments. So it's literally looking for an argument, or rather for a formal argument to our function, which is called paste 0 blah blah blah, like as a string. So what we need is the second case where we first evaluate so we say we want ... n, and then we pass it directly to missing. So basically that's what is happening. So at this point, let me get back my browser and let's source that function. So now we are exactly where the browser is called, and let's check if we have a trailing comma, and it's true. So yes, we did pass a trailing comma to our function. Now what happens if we find out that we have a trailing comma? The first thing is we need to reduce the length, or when we need to reduce n by 1, since when looping we only want to loop or up to like n minus 1 if n is, well, missing. So what you're going to do here is, if has trailing comma, I want you to go only up to n minus 1. Sorry. And another thing is, this has to happen for the names too. So if you're reducing n by 1, it also means that the names should be reduced by 1. So before we reduce the n, we can just say the names are going to be nms and then subset dash n, because you don't want that last value. Okay, so that's it. Now we need to loop. So for the looping, let's just go with a for loop. I could have used an lapply here, but lapply kind of feels off in this usage. So I'll just go for for loop. So this is going to be, I'm just going to call it out. This is going to be a vector and it's going to be of mode list. Then it's going to be of length n. And now what we need to do is say for index in sequence length n. So you want to access each of the values in the dots and assign them to our list. So the value will be, now again remember, to access the value of a dot, let me show you the docs of dot 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 ELT again. You should do dot 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 ELT n so that you access the nth value. Okay, so dot 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 ELT, and then we pass in n, and then we say out subset this index. Nope, actually should I should pass in index, not n. So I'm saying out subset that index will be equal to the value, and then after this, of course, it's time to assign the names. So I'm just saying the names of out will be nms, and then return the out. Okay, so let's test our program with this default example. So actually could have just run R script list2, and there we go. So this works. Now what if they are named? So let's say a is equals to 1, b equals to 2, and then c equals to 3. Will this still work? So I do R script list2, and there you go, it works. What if they are a mixture? What if the fourth argument here was something like 50? It was unnamed. Will it still work? So R script list2, and there we go, it works. Now what if we had a null? For example, null there. Will this still work? R script list2. We have an error, and the error says names attribute 5 must be the same length as vector 4. So this means when assigning the names right here, we are finding that we have 5 names, but the length of out is 4. So where's the error coming from? It's coming from here, because how do I explain this? Let's say we have a list and we are going to say it's x, and we say a is equals to 1 and b is equals to 2. How do I add a third element called, let's say, c with a value of null? When I try to do x subset c and then assigning it to null, what happens? Nothing, because when you use the double square brackets and then for assignment, if the value is null, R assumes that you want to remove that value, so it chucks that value from the list. What you should do, however, is you do x and then you use the single subsetting brackets. So x subset that value c, and then you say this is supposed to be the list, and then you put null inside the list, so that next time when you check in the inside of that x, you can see that c is now null. So this means we need a check here, and we're going to say if is null value if this value is null, okay, if it's null value, what I want you to do is out subset that index should be equal to list null. And after this, I just want you to continue looping. But for normal values, I want you to do this. And I think this should work now. Let's do R script list2, and there we go. What if we name our null? So let's say D is equals to null. Will this still work? Let's have the trailing comma. Let's try this again, list2, and there we go. So this is working. Now it's time to run the tests to ensure that everything is working as expected. So we are going to do, I'm going to source that file, so source list2, and then I'm going to source the tests. And there we go. So all our tests are passing. So this is how you can create your own list2. Yeah, well, without having to import Erlang. But if you already import it, you might as well use Erlang's list2. So yeah, that's it. I hope you learned something new, and thanks for watching.